Hi everyone, so great to have you join me today. This is our second day of Be Transformed book study with the book Reinventing You, Simple Steps to Transform Your Body, Mind, and Spirit. This is Dana Arcuri of danaarcuri.com, and so we're working today on chapter 3, which is titled Faith is Built in the Dark. And in all honesty, this was not an easy chapter to write. It really put me in a place where I had to re-walk a very challenging and painful time in my life that goes back 5 years ago. So nevertheless, I'll start with the quote that I use at the beginning of this chapter. And it's by Elizabeth Gilbert, who says, "Faith is walking face first and full speed into the dark." And that's what I felt like. 5 years ago, I was at the end of my rope. I had been already struggling for several years with the fibromyalgia, herniated discs, a lot of medical problems and challenges that were unresolved. In my early days of the diagnosis, I just thought, hey, I will be happy to take medication an effort to reduce the symptoms, especially the pain. Anyone who knows about fibromyalgia, it is a muscle disorder that impacts the entire body. There's 18 trigger points that hurt all over. The pain can be intense. It's disabling. And basically, I had to stop working. My life pretty much came to a screeching halt because of the horrific consequences involved with this disorder. And so in this chapter, I share about how I was prescribed various medications and they started to have negative side effects, which then became severe interactions. Severe interactions are worse than a side effect. So a side effect could be, you gain weight, or you have a headache, or you get insomnia, or you have maybe vertigo, which is dizziness. But when you have an actual severe interaction, that is something different. That is something in which the fierceness of the symptoms is elevated to a very high degree, where at this point, with me, it was really taking a hold on my cognitive function, on my emotional well-being, on my physical health, on my ability to just get through one day at a time. And so what happened is some drugs have a black box warning, and some drugs actually cause serious challenges, in which the two drugs that I was taking at the time, and I was on at least 4 or 5, but 2 of the drugs actually did have a black box warning for suicide. And even though the black box warning claims that it's only for the younger generation, basically people under 25 years old, and I was in my 40s, in my own experience, I believe that a black box warning is for every age group, based on the fact that I was not a young adolescent. I was a grown adult, and yet I experienced the dire implications of the potent cocktail of chemicals that caused a suicidal ideation. And so, someone can say, hey, you're a woman of faith, why would you even have that problem? And so I want to just be real that just because we are women of faith, just because we believe in God, just because we may have been in the church and we have been actively involved with, reading the Bible, knowing God's word, and really following God, even if it's all our life, that doesn't mean we're exempt from something negative. That doesn't mean we're exempt from suicide either. And so, you may take it with a grain of salt, or you may take it very serious. What I'm trying to say is when you have chemicals and they change our central nervous system, they change our neurotransmitters, and they could wreak havoc on our mind, anything could happen. And so for me, the worst of the worst happened, in which I was at a place that was quite dark, that was desperate, and I was not healthy, I was not well, and I did overdose on drugs. And it really wasn't that I wanted to die. I think, when you really walk back, I had to re-walk those horrible steps, that journey and that pathway that was extremely dark and scary. But when I re-examined it and had to analyze myself and say, what was really going on? What was really going on? Did I really have a death wish? I think in reality, I didn't so much have a death wish. I really believe that when you are taking potent drugs, they take your mind hostage. And so some people may not understand, some people may disagree. And I always say, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to not agree. And we could just agree to disagree. But I'm basing this on my own experience. And that is that despite my faith, despite my years of following God and having a heart after Him, that I came upon chemical toxic reactions in which I really felt that I was losing my mind. And I landed in a psychiatric unit, and I had brought with me a book by Joyce Myers. And many of you are aware of the book called The Battlefield of the Mind. And, I was barely hanging on to a shred of hope. I was really suffering and looking for answers and just on my knees begging and pleading God to help me. And as I read, it was 2 Timothy 1:7 in the book Battlefield of the Mind. It says, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And so right there, in my psych unit, alone in my room, I said to God, please give me a sound mind. I yearn for a sound mind. I can't do this alone, and I need you. I am at my wit's end, and I seek you, Lord. And I was desperate for help. And I don't know what you're going through right now. I don't know if at this moment you have something that you are experiencing in which you are desperate for answers and solutions, and you're desperate for God to give you a breakthrough. But at that moment, at that time in my life, I was desperate and I needed help. And I needed to rebuild my life. I needed to regain my health. And the story shares that I had to really hit rock bottom before I could go up. On a bright note, when you hit rock bottom, when you reach bottom, the only way to go is up. So, nevertheless, if you're in that place right now, trust that that's it. You already are at rock bottom. So there is definitely, boom, there is grace, there is mercy, there is God's miraculous healing when we're in rock bottom. And so I wanted to share that in my chapter, I have different examples of rock bottom because everybody has their own story. You have your own unique story of rock bottom. And if for any reason you've never really gone through anything tragic, traumatic, or this intense, consider yourself blessed and thank God. Because in reality, most people don't go through life with just a smooth sailing, no problems, no tragedies, no mishaps, no messes. Most of us do have something, even if it is just like the loss of a pet, the loss of a parent, the loss of a job, a breakup of a marriage, something. Most of us can relate that we have gone through losses. And so here are a few examples of those rock bottom moments. The one is when your home is foreclosed and you have nowhere to live. When you're at the cemetery and you have to bury your child. When your doctor confirms that yes, you do have cancer. When you wrestle to do what's right, but the enemy is luring you to fall into his trap and to do what is wrong. When you're given the pink slip at your dream job and you find yourself in the unemployment line. After your spouse files for divorce and he's been cheating on you and you're left alone. And the last one is when raw emotions are paralyzing you and you are consumed in fear. And these are all examples. And of course, the list is long, and I'm sure that you have your own story that you could even share with us if you have the willingness, if you're, open. I would love to hear your own rock bottom story. The one paragraph that when I read my chapter myself, and if I have to zoom into, okay, out of everything I wrote, out of everything I share, what do I believe could be the most empowering, the most life-changing, or the most encouraging? And so on page 15, in the middle of the chapter, is a paragraph that I'm going to read. And I wrote, "The beauty of adversity is that when we hit bottom, the only way to go is up. Our faith is built in the dark and the valleys and during the back-breaking battles in life. We can be certain of this. This is when God shows up to work miracles behind the scenes. During our struggles to reclaim our lives physically, emotionally, and spiritually, when we're blinded by darkness, Jesus gives us hope. His hope is found in 2 Corinthians 4:6, which says, 'For God who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ.'" And so today, know that your pain could be used for God's gain. It could be used, the tragedies, the traumas, the losses, the grief, the adversity, and the fiery furnace of affliction can be used for God to take your story, to take your rock bottom moment, and to actually use it to bring someone else to him, to know him more, to come to Christ, for his glory to shine. And so trust that there is no mess, there is no mistake, there is no tragedy, there is no loss and no grief and no suffering and no pain on earth that God can't use for his kingdom. And so I look back and I think to myself, oh my God, would I want to have to rewalk that? No. Would I want to have to go through that again? No. But then I feel like God's saying to me, you know what? But what if I could save someone's life? What if your loved one could be saved through it? I mean, right now it brings tears to me to think that all my suffering and loss, it's not in vain. Your suffering and your loss, it's not in vain. If there's nothing else that's good that comes of it, the good is that someone can be saved. What if it's your son? What if it's your daughter? What if it's your spouse or your best friend or your parent or your neighbor or a stranger who could come to Christ because of your rock bottom moment? I mean, that to me makes me re-examine the rough path I have walked and the pain and the hell on earth I had to endure. But it makes me re-examine it, and it makes me say, okay, God, use me, take my life, and go ahead, Lord. Even if I have to go back through the fiery ashes, if I have to walk back over those burning coals, Lord, use me. Even if my faith has to be built in the dark in order for someone else to have hope, for someone else to be saved, for someone else to have a life that's transformed from the inside out. And so there is this willingness, there is this readiness to just surrender it all. Just surrender it. Surrender my will, my way, my easy, comfortable life, to take up the cross, an effort for God to receive all glory. And so let's end today with our questions on, let's see, page 16. And so for those who may not have my book, I'll say the questions. And then you could always pause the video and jot down your answer. Or if you do have the book, that's great. You could, in advance, of course, work through the questions. So the first question is, recall a specific time when you experienced your darkest moment. How did God grow your faith during this difficulty? Number 2, when you faced trials or tribulations, were you able to audibly pray? Or did you feel like you were suffering to such a high degree you didn't even have words? You couldn't even pray for yourself because you're suffering so badly. And so share that. And if you couldn't pray for yourself, were you able to ask someone to pray for you? Were you able to reach out and say maybe to your friend, family, church, someone, hey, can you pray for me? I'm really struggling. Could you pray for? And then you would tell them A, B, C, whatever it is. Next would be number 3. Do you relate to Romans 8:26, in which there were times when God heard your groanings and he prayed for you? So Romans 8:26 is basically, I'm going to sum it up. It's basically saying that when you're suffering so badly, you can't even groan or moan a prayer. You don't have words because you're suffering so badly. And so your prayer might be silent, might be that you can't even say a prayer for your own self. Do you relate to that? Have you ever been in that position? And if so, how did you work through it? And lastly, number 4, how could your personal journey building your faith in darkness help others? So in what way could your own dark trials help other people and possibly give them hope, give them encouragement, or in some way reach out and touch their lives in a positive way? So nevertheless, I'm going to end for now. Tomorrow we will be working on, we will be working on the next chapter. And in all honesty, I don't have it in front of me. I'm pretty sure it's the chapter on hearing God. Yes, I think I am correct. It is hearing God. So that is another awesome chapter in which a lot of people have a lot of questions, and we will definitely go over it. So nevertheless, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to our next day. Be blessed. Bye-bye.